I'd like to run you briefly through today's agenda. If we can get the next slide, please. We will start, we have with us Dr. Dirk Glesser, the Director of Sustainable Development of Tourism Department at UNWTO. So he will be sharing welcome remarks and introducing us to the Global Mapping of Tools and Methodologies project, which is the project that gives context to the overview that we are presenting and discussing today. We also have with us Jeremy Smith. We have been working with him in this project, and he will be sharing the tools and methodologies that have been reviewed so far, information on those tools for accommodation, tour operators and destination that have been reviewed. And lastly, we will take some time to present the status quo of tourism emissions measurement, basically our current understanding of this complex topic, where do we stand as a sector and which are our recommendations for the way forward. And to finish, we will have a questions and answers session, so make sure to note your questions and also use the chat throughout the webinar so that we can make it as interactive as possible. Next slide, please. This is a reminder of the ground rules so that we all have a fruitful and smooth session. Basically, everyone is familiar now with the dynamics in Zoom. I just wanted to maybe suggest that you could adjust your name using the right click, your name and Zoom to show your organization and then your name, as maybe we don't know each other yet, or the others are also interested to know who is who in this webinar. Please note that we're recording. We will be disseminating the recording, and if you stay with us, then we assume that you are okay with this. And with this brief intro, I'm going to hand over to Dirk for his welcome remarks and introduction. Dirk, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Virginia, for the welcome. Welcome, everybody. I'm here with my colleagues, Roxana, Virginia, and our expert, Jeremy Smith. Just as we have this afternoon session and already the experience of this morning session, allow me to dive a bit deeper into the background of this current research project so that you understand why it was undertaken and how far we got actually in this project and what are the objectives. As most of you might remember, at COP25, UNWTO, together with the International Transportation Forum, presented the research results and the simulation of how the tourism sector would perform under the current ambition by the year 2030 to set the framework of the discussion for international tourism and domestic tourism. And naturally, we took into account the very strong component of aviation for tourism. We did back then already quite a number of simulations and research related to the implications of where to attribute these emissions and produce that in a publication which my colleague Roxana then later on will share in the online chat. This question emerged this morning. That's why I want to advance on that very important perspective on international tourism and aviation. But at the same time, what happened since then was that we wanted to create a much better understanding of which methodologies are out there relevant for accommodation, tour operators and destinations. What are the practical experiences which have been made by those applying these methodologies? And by having a good understanding of what are the leading destinations, accommodation providers and tour operators are doing, help those which are right now determining their entry and their approach and the tools they are choosing for their specific undertaking so that we enter over there and ease and facilitate their entry. But at the same time, then we help guiding the global discussion on where to support and what to harmonize. So far, we have the commitments of 700 signatories to the Glasgow Declaration, committing the tourism sector and through tourism policies to a high ambition. And that is for us and the launch partners and the many who have helped to make this declaration a joint effort and present it to the global community as a commitment of the tourism sector, a very useful undertaking. Here to the right-hand side right now, or in the core slide, you will see the roadmap of what has been done under this very specific research project's objectives and the umbrella. And we started there in March 22 this year to establish the initial data set and criteria. Both I will speak a little bit more in a second too. After having done so, we tested and refined the criteria, discussing that with those involved in these methodologies or applying them, and redefined after that then the way how we best structure the research. Naturally, we cannot research everything which is existing globally, but we wanted to give a global overview. So we had to readjust over there and find representative samples and the right questions. We tested these initial assumptions, we redefined them again, and today in this webinar, in the second of today's webinar, we are making transparent how far we got and what are the assumptions we have made so far. Jeremy and Virginia will explain them then later on of this webinar. Let's go to the next slide so that we show over here the 5 groups which we have identified at the beginning of the process as the groups in which we are looking for the methodologies and the approaches. We selected these 5 groups because we said these are the leading current initiatives in the tourism sector, or these are the initiatives through which leading companies and destinations would appear, and for where we have a good entry, through which we have a good entry point to analyze better their specific experiences and techniques. So the first one was the global survey on climate action, which was conducted last year and where we soon will release the final results. The Glasgow Declaration signatories is a natural group, and many of the tourism declare signatories are also a Glasgow Declaration signatory, recognizing here tourism declares as one of the leading pioneering initiatives in the tourism sector. Then tourism companies reporting with science-based targets, and in the last group, the companies participating in WTTC's Net Zero Roadmap launched last year. Through these 5 groups, we think we have a very good and representative, above all, representative overview of groups in the tourism sector. The next slide shows now the criteria through which we looked at this initiative and what we aimed to extract by systemizing the review, looking for pertinence to the point of to what extent are the lessons, are the elements here identified relevant for signatories of the Glasgow Declaration for the very specific purpose of planning, reporting, and setting objectives. The next thing, to what extent are they covering scope 1, 2, or 3 of the measurements, and what are the experiences made by those who have reported and measured under those under these objectives. Practicality is something what is fundamental for us for recommending this then later on to others, aiming at engaging in the measurement and improving their carbon performance, climate action. Replicability, usefulness, and to what extent can we take that outside to other companies, companies with limited resources, as we heard this morning, and we identified already as a crucial success factor for those though committed but with limited resources. To what extent are the tools applicable or simple enough to be applied? Accessibility, freely available, is a very important element of the way how we evaluated the available tools and techniques, as this would allow then companies significantly better to engage and predict over there also on the costs from a financial point of view to them. With that, I have now the pleasure to hand over to Jeremy, our expert on this specific subject, to dive deeper. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I hope everyone can hear and see me okay. I apologize for having to come in through my phone. My computer decided it was going to collapse 5 minutes before this started, but it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to update you on progress during this very involved few months, looking across our sectors, tools and methodologies and the efforts being made around measuring our respective carbon emissions. We reviewed 50 or more methodologies and tools over the course of the last few months, looking at them in as much detail as we were able to, in order to create the picture that I'm going to share some details with you now. In particular, we've been looking at tools and methodologies for these three particular sectors: for the accommodation sector, for the tour operators, and for the destination. So first of all, to look at accommodation, where is probably the best served of all of the different subsectors. And what we see here is a cross-section, a snapshot of some of the tools and methodologies that very much deliver across those criteria that Dirk just shared in the previous slide. The Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative that was launched in 2012 and has gone through various refinements and over the course of the following few years up until now, and continues to be refined with a view to aligning fully with the greenhouse gas protocol that is the global standard on carbon measurement. That now has over 25,000 hotels signed up to it and is supporting a wider number of hotels than any other measurement initiative, and it is as close to default as there is. However, it is definitely not default in a situation where we have 185,000 or more properties, hotels in the industry. So as we look to see what else is going on out there, we see that there are tools such as Conserve, brought to us by Considerate Group, that was formerly called Considerate Hoteliers, which is an enriched data platform that enables hoteliers users to measure, to track, to monitor across a broad range of different metrics and to engage. And this is a fee-based tool. Several of the multinationals who have been looked at and who are often the ones who have science-based targets and have legal requirements around measurement are developing or have developed their own bespoke internal measurement systems designed very specifically for their portfolio. Others who've also been designing tools, but here it's membership organizations, and those might be sort of classic membership organizations such as the Long Run, whose members are hotels and eco-conservancies, eco-lodges, etc., or Green Key, that's a membership organization in the sense that it's a certification system and therefore its members are those who have been certified by it. Both of these provide versions of measurement for their members to suit what they are. For the Long Run, it is very much designed to support the sort of businesses that they operate with, whereas for Green Key, they have adapted HCMI to their members. Bringing it a little bit more up to date and to see what's actually happening at the moment, what we see is two different directions looking to reflect one of the challenges around the complexity of measurement. And one of those is seen through the net zero methodology for hotels, a highly detailed methodology free to anyone to download, that was published initially at COP26 last year, written by Greenview, the same consultancy firm who worked on the original Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative. And over 180 or more pages, it looks to get really into the detail and the granularity of how exactly can hotels account for their different rights and roles and responsibilities around measuring towards working towards net zero. Addressing the complexity in the other direction comes in the likes of Weaver and the SME Climate Hub calculator. Weaver is a fee-based tool that is currently in beta and being launched fully in the next few months, whereas the SME Climate Hub calculator is free so long as you sign up to the commitments of the SME Climate Hub, which are themselves very closely, if not exactly, aligned with the Glasgow Declaration's commitments around carbon reduction. Both of these tools look to simplify the process and to engage far more, particularly SMEs and those who are starting out on their journey, by removing the complexity that often confronts one when one looks at a broad way of trying to measure everything, and to simplify it down to enabling people to get an initial estimate on their measurement, for example, through uploading their energy bills, to be able to track what they are doing and then make progress. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the broad takeaways for accommodation are that HCMEI, the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative, is by some margin the most widely used methodology and tool. Yet despite that, it is still not universally used, and many continue to design their own solutions to adapt to their businesses. And as we see in those last two tools that I was saying, what we see is that there is an effort to address the challenge of complexity by simplification, by tools making it more user-friendly and more interactive. We now move on, please, to the next slide. Thank you. If the situation is complex for accommodation providers, it gets increasingly complex as we look at the state of play for tour operators. And having reviewed across them all, what we see is that there is a multiplicity of different approaches being used, and no one approach has sort of reached standard in any way. Much Better Adventures is one of the tour operator companies that was a co-founder of the Tourism Declares, and they decided that they couldn't find a methodology and tool that worked for themselves, so they worked in-house and built their own way of doing things. They now present the carbon measurement of every single trip on their websites, but they have also open sourced and shared in detail, in a very user-friendly way, the methodology that they have used in order to get to that point. Similar thing can be seen with Wilderness Adventures, a tour operator company operating in the UK. The tool that over the last few years has been seen as the tool for tour operators is Karmakal, a database-based tool that seeks to enable tour operators to measure the various component parts of their trip, of the portfolio, and the various parts of the products that come together to make up a tour. It is fee-based and is undergoing updates, so we have been told. Reflecting the similar sort of progress that's been happening in the last year or so with accommodation for destinations, there are tools such as Path Net Zero, a very recently launched tool in the last few months that likewise, again, fee-based, looks to provide a simplified way for tour operators to engage with getting an estimation of the various component parts of their of the product, the transport, the accommodation, the experiences, etc. However, in the absence of as yet solutions that many tour operators are finding solve all the various pieces for them, what we are seeing is that tour operators are using a multitude of resources in order to measure the different parts of the trip. So they are leaning on accommodation-based tools and methodologies to measure the impacts from whatever hotels their guests may stay in along the journey. And then they are looking to more classic carbon calculators that focus on measuring the impacts of transport, and in particular aviation, to put together an estimation of the carbon impacts of that component of the trip. And there were some of the various calculators that seem to be being most used and most rigorously developed are Atmosphere, the German company, the Accommoda calculator, some of the work going on with Google Flights that in particular is working through the Travelist Coalition, then coming together with Skyscanner to develop a standardized way of presenting the carbon emissions from every flight on when you look on the Google booking options. And again, through that, they have been open sourcing the methodology and bringing it forward. And then moving beyond flights, you have the likes of Sustainable Travel International, whose calculator looks to provide a very granular level of detail across a broad range of land and sea-based transport options in addition to aviation, so that one can look at the different types of boat or trip that one is on. These component parts come together to offer tour operators where they're at. Can you on to the next slide, please? What we see is that these differing operating models for tour operators, where you may get a tour operator who takes you to stay in hotels that they own, or you may get a tour operator who takes you to stay in hotels that they don't own. They may be using their own fleet of buses that they own, or even their own aviation, their own airlines that they own, or they may just be using other people's. All of these different operating models make the challenge of addressing measurement and responsibilities for the different scales of emissions more challenging. In particular, this is shown, and Dirk mentioned this in his introduction, that there is no current consensus when it comes to international tour operators over the inclusion or not of international aviation. And you will see different tour operators declaring what they consider to be the carbon impact of their tours, the measured carbon impact of their tours, but some of them are not including the flight to start the tour and others are. And what we see is that businesses who are looking to address the challenge of getting an accurate measurement have increasingly been turning to consultants or actually bringing climate experts inside of their own businesses in order to address the specific challenges that their business model has when it comes to accurate carbon measurement. Thank you. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So if we are getting progressively more challenging as it gets progressively more complicated, so this continues into the situation currently for destinations and for the DMOs that represent them. They have, it would seem, the most complex situation when it comes to working out what is their responsibility, what are they supposed to be measuring and accounting for, and they have the least. They are the least well-resourced in terms of methodologies and tools in order to enable them to do that. What we see, these first two bullet points, the Measuring Sustainable Tourism Initiative, and indeed also the input-output model being worked on through Queensland University, is work being done at a research level to try to bring together economic measures such as the tourism satellite accounts, and then environmental measures to be able to pull together a full understanding of the carbon emissions of the tourism sector, often as relates to other sectors, at a national level. When it comes to providing the DMOs who have made the commitments through Glasgow to deliver on their climate action plans, what we see is that some DMOs, in particular some national tourism organizations, have been prioritizing working to support their own stakeholders inside of the destination. So the likes of Visit Finland and Visit Scotland have been developing calculators and then supporting their industry, the hoteliers, the tour operators, other parts of the value chain inside of the country, to measure using the same set of tools and metrics to provide both shared guidance, the ability to benchmark across the destination, and have a shared and standardized way of measuring, if only at a national level. We also see that the likes of ADEME, that is the French ministry or organization for supporting the country's energy transition, has been open sourcing various forms of calculators, not just for tourism, but broadly to support businesses and individuals in France to engage with measurement and with various other aspects of decarbonizing. And in both this and with those bespoke calculators, you see that as the challenge of measurement is there for DMOs, they're also engaging with the ability to support their members in moving forward. One particular tool that's worth drawing attention to is the CO tourism tool and methodology developed by Innovation Norway, that's the Norwegian DMO. And there, what they have developed is a tool designed to be able to enable users to compare the carbon impact of different demographics for inbound tourism from one source market or another, and then to compare the impact of the travel that they take around the country, so as to enable people planning tourism strategy, planning tourism marketing for Norway, to compare which source markets have the most impact on the carbon emissions of Norwegian tourism. And then the final tool that I wanted to give bring some awareness to is actually been created outside of our industry, and this is a tool called Trace that has been developed by the event industry, which is an extremely adjacent industry to ours, an awful lot of overlapping of value chains. What we see with Trace is the effort to develop a tool that enables event producers, people putting on large or small events at destinations around the world, to be able to measure and bring together the carbon impacts, the climate impacts of the place where the building where they host the event, of the accommodation that delegates come and stay in, of the transport to and from the event, of the food, of the waste, of the many component parts. And while this hasn't been designed for tourism, there's a very strong sort of overlap, and indeed some destination managers are reported to be using this when looking at business tourism inside of their destinations. And what I think is worth bringing to, in particular about this tool, is that rather than ending at the provision of data to those that use it, that data is then used to guide people, to guide users in how they could then address their carbon emissions, having learnt what they are, what interventions, what reductions they might make, and finally to help them provide streamlined reporting. So it takes them through the whole journey from measurement through to reporting via decarbonisation. Okay, thank you very much. I'll then pass over now to Virginia. Oh, I'll give you some destinations. I think I might well have said them. Go on to the next slide, please. So just to reflect one more time that for destinations which are by nature diverse and unique in their situation, this is the most complex challenge when it comes to understanding what the role of the DMO is, where the boundaries are, how they should engage. And the situation is made no easier by being the least well served in terms of current methodologies and tools. However, we do see, certainly at a national level, these input-output models evolving and maybe giving us an opportunity to create some sort of standardized and useful and accurate measure of how carbon emissions play out at a national level. Thank you very much. I'll hand over now to Virginia to go even deeper.
Thank you, Jeremy, for walking us through the various tools and methodologies, and thanks, Dirk, for the intro. I'd like to take a moment to also thank those that have been working with us in the Glasgow Declaration Working Group for their inputs to get to where we stand today. And please allow me to recap the objective of our webinar, today's meeting, which basically is an extended consultation with tourism stakeholders on the findings so far. So if you are aware of a tool which has not been mentioned, methodology that has not been mentioned, please bring it to our attention. Maybe we checked it and we considered it didn't fulfill the criteria, but maybe we didn't. So please participate, engage. We need your help to really make this overview as complete as possible. So the draft, we are hoping that the overview will be transformed into a technical brief that will be released at COP27. We already have a draft of this document. If you scan the QR code, you will be able to access both the draft and the feedback form. And we are happy to receive any comments by 31st of October, please. So you have two weeks to give us your feedback. And I'm now going to move on into presenting the status quo for tourism emissions measurement. Next slide, please. Basically, at least the key elements of our understanding so far. Where do we stand? So the first statement is no surprise. Measurement of emissions is only starting. As you know, and it has been mentioned by my colleagues, last year we conducted a global survey where more than 1,000 tourism stakeholders participated, and well, out of those, it was a bit less than 10% the ones that were measuring. So we confirmed our assumptions that this is really a complex issue to address for our stakeholders. At present, there are very few national or regional destinations reporting on emissions. And for larger companies and major players, measurement is reporting is increasingly becoming a legal requirement. Nevertheless, for now, we only see a few reporting their emissions. In the case of SMEs, actually some of the most proactive frontrunners are SMEs. These are purpose-led companies. They have undertaken the challenges of measurement and reporting without centralized support or guidance. Yet the vast majority of SMEs have not engaged at all with measurement. Next, please. We're also seeing a lack of consensus over responsibilities and boundaries. It has been mentioned as well, there is an ongoing debate on whether aviation emissions should be integrated in a destination's footprint or not, or within a tour operator's emissions or not. And this needs to be addressed so that we can find hopefully consensus and be strategic to also let's say respect the different realities of the destinations across the globe. We have also observed that the priorities of the Global South, stakeholders in the Global South and Global North are different. We see that destinations or stakeholders from the Northern Hemisphere are mainly speaking about decarbonization, where those in the South are prioritizing adaptation. Therefore, most of the tools we have found are originating from stakeholders in the North. There are other factors of importance as for instance, non-carbon benefits, which are even harder to measure than emissions themselves. And we also have seen that some tourism organizations are not measuring emissions, but they are rather measuring the frequency of actions that may result in emissions reduction. For example, how many bike trips were sold versus excursions by car, or how many vegan meals were served, and this helped them advance. So it's also something to take into consideration. Next slide, please. We noted that measurement is seen as a barrier rather than an enabler. Many tourism stakeholders consider measurement difficult, and either they are worried that they spend so much time on measurement and trying to do that effectively that they don't have time to spend on actual decarbonization projects, or they are measuring, they are not measuring and just focus on emissions reductions without knowing how much impact they have. The easier to use tools normally have a cost, which could be a barrier for some, and also where tools and methodologies have been created without an ongoing funding mechanism, the providers may lack the finance to improve the user experience, improve functionality, and sometimes tools are discontinued. When this happens, former users, there's a risk that former users would lose motivation. So it's also something to be addressed. Next, please. We also see a new generation of tools emerging. Jeremy already spoke about this, but basically earlier tools are often more complex to use. They are based on spreadsheets, and they need an understanding of multiple varying emission sources for you to be able to complete that spreadsheet. And the newer tools, we have seen that they focus on easy to access and understand data sources, such as energy bills, or sometimes they even offer the possibility to connect to smart devices. So there is progress now towards integrating measurement with targeted guidance for relevant decarbonization interventions and the seamless production of reports. And likewise, whereas the methodologies that underpin many earlier tools are unclear or inaccessible, there is a growing movement towards open sharing of methodologies, which will be essential to accelerate rapid sector progress. Next, please. Here you see our first 6 recommendations, which of course we hope to be able to enrich through your feedback. Basically, further work needs to be undertaken to identify and promote the benefits that stem from measuring emissions, to ensure that all stakeholders across the tourism value chain are able to see a clear business case for engaging in the process. A business can clearly see the benefit to its, let's say, balance sheet of a measurement that shows an increase in average length of stay, If this increase also means a reduction in the number of international flights required to make the same profit, then it also brings a reduction in emissions. So yeah, I guess we need to be more strategic on as to how we communicate and promote measurement. Also, all stakeholders would benefit from an agreement and guidance on the boundaries of their measurement responsibilities. Basically, we need to make it clear how different parts of the value chain play their role. And the boundaries will differ greatly between different types of organizations. For example, for hotels, scopes 1 and 2 will constitute the larger part of their footprint, whereas for tour operators or DMOs, mainly emissions will be falling under scope 3. So also a balance needs to be struck between the need to be able to accurately measure and to ensure engagement, efficacy, and progress. So we need to scale up fast and can progressively improve, but action needs to start now. We cannot just be waiting for perfection. We would need to develop tailored guidance will need to be delivered, in particular for destinations and SMEs. We had a comment from a DMO representative who said, and I quote, "As a DMO, it is challenging to have 3 streams of climate action work. 1, measuring and reducing carbon as an organization. 2, helping our stakeholders to measure and continue reducing their footprints. And 3, advocating for consumers to make lower emission travel choices." And he said, and even 4, finding funding for climate action is also a constant struggle. So indeed, we need to prioritize this type of guidance. We also need to engage large players. They need to be on board. These companies have in-house capacity and expertise, or they have the possibility to outsource it, and they normally include SMEs in their scope 3 measurements. So they could actually catalyze support for these entities, SMEs, to advance in their measurements. And lastly, we shall continue advancing in order to also, let's say, address challenging areas such as climate risk valuations, which would allow us to understand what is at stake in economic terms and mobilize the necessary support for adaptation. We need to further understand the measurement or the mitigation potential of nature-based solutions, how to measure non-carbon benefits, etc. So it's a large task ahead of us. We, as mentioned by Dirk and colleagues, hope that this work can at least support those trying to engage to have an easier start. And I'll stop here now. Is your turn. Questions and answers are starting. So please don't be shy. I hope we can have an interacting discussion. Please raise your hand so that we can start the debate. Thank you. I see already one hand from Tim. Tim, great to have you on board. The floor is yours. Tim from ETOA.
Okay, sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Thanks very much for all of this. It's very helpful to walk through the landscape. One question I've got, which partly relates to the tour operators, sort of, Jeremy made the point that some include, some do not include aviation. Is there any effort to try and align methodology around measuring the aviation? Because at least part of the issue that we're picking up, and I was talking to an airline association in Brussels last week, is, there does not appear to be a consensus as to how to go about measuring that. We all know the reasons for potential differences, depending on which equipment the airline uses. It may be the case that they're more or less efficient. At time of booking, it may be one aircraft. When you actually enjoy the service, it could be a different circumstance. So there's a lot of reasons for saying it's too difficult, which is in a way, one of the biggest challenges that we have. But unless we can sort of agree some consensus on this is an intelligent hack for doing aviation emissions, then I think we're going to struggle to include it, because there's always going to be reasons to just have a battle of the methodologies as opposed to just make progress.
Thanks, Tim. Very, very important point, as we had anticipated it would come to the table. Yeah, I think there is progress. We definitely need to work with those leading the aviation discussion to find that consensus. But maybe I'll ask Jeremy that he can share a bit what Travelist is doing. I think he mentioned a bit the work by Google and Skyscanner, which is, I guess, already a synergy that may become useful to all of us. And then, yeah, I totally agree that we should advance towards finding consensus on what's the best approach for us. I also see Dirk's hand. Dirk, you want to take the floor first prior to Jeremy?
Yeah, I think let me try to give Tim the political dimension from our point of view, and then later on let's look at the technologies. We had this morning, Tim, already the same issue on the table, and that's why at the beginning I mentioned and referred to the study which we did together with the International Transportation Forum, where we analyzed over there also the elements of routes. We discussed over there elements of whether it's the source market, the destination, and where to attribute those elements to. That is more the status quo, Tim, and it's absolutely correctly that there is a question related to what shall we do right now as tour operators under these circumstances. The undertaking of this consultation here has the purpose of what is most practical, and then for the Glasgow Declaration, for UNWTO and the partnering institutions, we built a consensus around that. And the purpose of this undertaking was that we are not finger pointing at transportation policies only and lean back as tourism. Tourism has an own responsibility. We have a lot of possibilities within the realm of tourism policies. And I'm just pointing here, Tim, at the point of how we do promotion to certain places, what products do we put on the table, promote, and what consequences this has then finally on the product. And once we have this option to promote or not to promote certain specific products, we also have to account for the consequences of these products. That is a simple logic. So what we want to promote here under the perspective from UNWTO is responsibility under tourism policies, accountability under tourism policies as much as possible, and practical. And with the point of practicality, this was part of the undertaking. We wanted to see from these 5 different groups, what is used, what is the feedback with these methodologies, what is it and you feel for your operations, does it have an impact for your operations? Does it have an impact when you are communicating to policymakers, when you are communicating to stakeholders? This feedback circle is right now widening with the 2 webinars we are conducting here today. With this feedback, then we are continuing our work. And that is what we are committed to. So if you tell us this is what tour operators in the European context want, we are very pleased to work with you over there on coherence and more standardized reporting without influencing over there necessarily immediately transportation sectors and others' responsibilities of reporting under other frameworks their emissions. But as I said now several times, we see it as the responsibility from tourism, from the tourism sector and tourism policies. Jeremy, over to you for the practical elements of it.
Thank you, Dirk. Just first of all, to declare an interest that when I speak of Travelist, I also do speak as someone who's on their advisory board. So I just want to say that to start with. And that Travelist, the context for those who don't know it, is to work with the large tech players, Booking, Expedia, Skyscanner, Google, Trip.com, excuse me, TripAdvisor, to standardize for the end consumer, the traveler, so that when looking at the different references to sustainability, be they flights or hotels or whatever else, when choosing to book a trip, they can feel confident that the way it is presented on one site is the same as the way it is presented on another, and underpinned with the same methodology. And that's the key point here. And the key point I'd make is that although, of course, the end purpose of Travelist is to bring the accurate and standardized and clear and trustworthy guidance frameworks signing to the consumer, they can only do that if what's happening behind the scenes around the methodologies and the data is robust. I'm not an aviation scientist, but what I would say is that what they are doing, which I think is part of this, reflects that model that we talked about, that Virginia and I had referred to when reflecting across them all, is sharing what, you can go and read the methodology, you can read the updates. It is all there to be seen and to be commented upon. The API for the tools are either now or soon to be shareable, which means that it is a core principle of making something accessible, open to challenge and criticism, and continually evolving and updating. And whether they have achieved where they need to get to or not is to be seen. But what they are doing, I believe, is going about it in the right order.
Thanks, Jeremy. Just one more sentence from my side. I mean, in the discussions this morning, basically, I think it was quite, let's say, agreed by all of us that for a tour operator who is managing flights like charter, etc., then of course there's no way around including the flights in the measurement. But for others, there are many layers to it and different realities. In any case, we have a lot of signatories in the Glasgow Declaration that are tour operators, and as Dirk said, if this is a concern, we're happy to see how to address it and advance progressively. I see now Henke from Offset Alliance. The floor is yours. You're on mute, Henke.
There we go. Sorry about that. You kept telling me that you had to do it. Thank you very much. So yes, my name's Henkel. I'm the co-founder of Offset Alliance. We're about 4 years in to helping small destination operators. We're in the US, so I don't know how this is going to change any of what the discussion points are. I just wanted to follow on from what's already been discussed in the Q&A around flights. In helping small destination operators, our clients, we always start with the approach of let's visualize what the emissions or what the environmental impact of a traveler going on your experience looks like. And pretty much every situation, 80+% of the environmental impact is coming from aviation. Now, the tricky piece of it, and it's not really tricky because for smaller organizations, they're not really getting deep into greenhouse gas protocol accounting, but technically with GHG protocol, the flights of your guests don't really fall clearly into any category. They don't really fall specifically even into your scope 3 because they're not your emissions. We help them to understand that you depend on those guests flying. So aviation absolutely should be a part of your accounting. How you address that, completely up to you. Do you offer an easy way for them to address that? Or do you absorb it yourself? So I just wanted to point that out from where we're coming from, what we see. The recent change from Google, I really appreciated Jeremy's last comment there about having a standardized approach of what's the agreement, let's say with RF, so with radiative forcing with flight emissions. Google making the recent decision to drop that out of their calculation, whereas a lot of others have not dropped that out because they feel like there's enough evidence there to apply that forcing to those measurements. So again, I wanted to chime in and say it's challenging a little bit for the smaller operators to first see it and understand, we absolutely depend on our guests having an environmental impact to even support our business and come have our experience. And we've even seen behavior where once they see that, it's kind of, you want to push it behind the scenes and not bring that front and center of, oh yeah, come experience this beautiful destination. And by the way, here's the negative environmental impact that you're going to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Henkel, for those useful comments. Saskia, the floor is yours. Saskia, you are on mute.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm a small tour operator from the Netherlands. And
sorry, you want to turn on your camera? If you wish, you can do that.
No,
it's
no,
not mandatory,
sure,
but
sure.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Saskia. I'm from a small tour operator in the Netherlands. And we have been measuring our carbon emissions for a long, long time, even if we are still small. We have been using Carmichael, but it's not really working for us because it's too complicated. And like Jeremy mentioned, it's being updated currently. But for flight, I think for a tour operator, it's absolutely essential to include the flights, even if you don't sell them yourself. We have a mixture of destinations, long haul destinations, but increasingly also offering destinations closer to home. And because we measure the carbon emissions, we can make decisions on our portfolio and really influence our portfolio, make them influence our portfolio. So I think it's really essential. We are now using Atmosphere, which is a very accessible tool. It's very easy to use it. And I know that in Germany, the Forum Andersreisen is also using Atmosphere for their members. So it's a lot of tour operators, especially SMEs, are going to use Atmosphere. And I think it's working well for them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Saskia.
maybe one more thing to add, because like we're talking about that capacity is often a problem. And we have been using students from Wageningen University to help us with the measurement. And that's really working out very well for us. And I think many operators can make use of tourism institutes, of educational institutes, of students who can help measuring. That's it.
Thank you. Sorry for cutting you before I thought you had finished. Thanks for sharing your experience and good suggestion to engage with the students. And please don't get us wrong. We are not advocating for not including flights. We just think it's way too complex to have a decision made in one go. So hopefully we just can advance jointly and find the way to consensus sooner than later. We have been discussing a lot about aviations and tour operators, but we have not discussed much about accommodation. We still have 3 minutes, and I'm going to be a bit naughty. And I see that Claire Whiteley from Sustainable Hospitality Alliance is connected. Claire, is it okay that I prompt you to maybe share a bit with us? We know that you are updating now the HCMI tool. Would you like to share a few words? Maybe she's busy and I was too naughty. Sorry for that. All right. Anybody else has a comment?
Ah, there we go. Sorry, I was trying to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Claire.
Sorry,
I totally thought, oh my God, I put her under the spotlight.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry. It was telling me I couldn't unmute myself. I was trying desperately.
It's great to see you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the call out there, and really interesting to hear all the discussions that have been going on. Yeah, just to mention really that the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative that has been discussed earlier as the one that's the most widely used within hospitality, that we're in the process of updating, and we'll be releasing a new version of that next week actually. And that is aligning even more with the greenhouse gas protocol. And we'll be doing a further review over the first half of next year. So at the moment, as Jeremy mentioned, it covers scope 1 and scope 2 with a small portion of scope 3, which is outsourced laundry. We will be looking at what other scope 3 emissions need to be incorporated into it to make it a more robust calculation of the carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions for hotels. and really sort of fully aligning it with the greenhouse gas protocol, as well as the net zero methodology that again Jeremy mentioned. Also in terms of trying to encourage a use across hotels, we've got, as Jeremy said, about 30,000 hotels that are using it at the moment, but we're working with partners, the likes of hotel associations and Travelist as well, to try and encourage use further across the industry. So hopefully that usage figure will dramatically pick up over the next 6 months to a year. And we'll have an even sort of stronger representation across the industry, so that there is more of that kind of aligned calculation and methodology across hotels that can then feed into things like Google and Booking and everyone else kind of looking for that comparable data.
Thank you so much, Claire. That's really great news. Looking forward to the release very shortly. Anybody else? Is the last chance for a comment or intervention? Okay, nobody else. Well, then I guess we are going to close our session. Thank you so much. It's been really enriching. And it's always great to see you, and we really appreciate your commitment to advance these complex issues and to support us along the way. Please remember that we will be receiving your comments until 31st of October. So you have the draft of the paper and the feedback form accessible through the left QR code. And you have on the right side information of our events at the COP, where the paper will be launched. Don't hesitate to make a sign if you're going to be around at COP27. So maybe we can get the chance to meet. And with this, this is all from my side. Dirk, I hand over to you for the final words and closing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you for everybody who shared and invested his time today into this call and the feedback you are providing us today and in the future. It's all about reducing the entry barriers and helping us to advance on issues where we can help climate action in the tourism sector to become a high ambition and across all the different elements of transportation, not only aviation, but also the important ground-bound transportation, which is leading or the major force for transporting tourists when it comes to domestic tourism. All these different facets need to be evaluated, advanced. This is one of the attempts we have here in front of us through this analysis and the research we presented to you today. We hope finalizing it, Virginia was saying that in due course for COP27, and then presenting it over there as a help to implement the tourism sector's commitment to a high ambition. I thank you, Virginia, Roxana from WTO for helping make this session possible. Jeremy, for the good work you are doing in the research project, and already here beyond the climate action in the tourism sector, you're omnipresent, and we appreciate that very much. But also all the other participants which are omnipresent in this sphere and leading through their practical experiences the implementation of climate action in the tourism sector. I thank you on behalf of UNWTO very much for this commitment, and let's continue that pathway.